Emma Larson navigated the bustling concourse of Reagan National Airport with a practiced ease. She moved among travelers with an unassuming grace, dragging a small, black rolling suitcase behind her, the wheels whispering over polished floors. Most people barely noticed her, their attention fixed on frantic phone calls, spilled coffee, or impatient children tugging at their parents' sleeves. Emma didn't mind blending into the crowd. In fact, she preferred it. After years of training, being unnoticed was not just a comfort, it was a necessity. She approached the security checkpoint, her boarding pass ready, and smiled politely at the TSA officer, who barely glanced at her. The scanner beeped, and she stepped through without delay, collecting her belongings with quiet efficiency. Passengers jostled and shuffled around her, many muttering complaints about the wait or the wait, intrusion into their day. She barely registered them, focusing instead on her own thoughts, which were unusually calm for someone who had spent her life preparing for crises most people would never face. The terminal's announcements were a familiar hum. Flight 472 to Washington, D.C., now boarding at Gate 12. Emma glanced at her watch, noted the time, and started toward the gate. Her boarding pass read Passenger 91, a seemingly arbitrary number. To everyone else, it meant nothing, just another seat in the middle of a commercial airliner. To her, though, it was a reminder of how far she had come. She wasn't just a passenger. She was someone trained for moments when ordinary people faltered. At the gate, families clustered around the boarding area, luggage stacked precariously on carts, and business travelers scrolled through phones with focused intensity. Emma waited, her turn, observing the crowd without judgment. There was a man nervously drumming his fingers against a carry-on bag, a teenager absorbed in a video game, and a woman juggling a screaming toddler and an oversized tote bag. These were ordinary people, ordinary lives, and Emma wondered briefly, how many would notice the extraordinary unfolding above them if it came to that? She boarded when her group was called, her movements precise, deliberate, but casual. The flight attendants greeted her with standard smiles. She returned the gestures, without revealing anything beyond politeness. Settling into seat 91, she placed her small bag in the overhead compartment and retrieved a notebook, opening it to a blank page. The act seemed mundane, but her eyes scanned not only the cabin, but the sky beyond the window. Even from this altitude, Emma could detect irregularities in the patterns of planes, clouds, and even subtle vibrations. It was a skill honed over years of training and countless simulations. The engines hummed as the plane taxied toward the runway. Passengers adjusted seats, buckled seat belts, and engaged in idle chatter. Emma remained composed, her posture relaxed, but alert. Her fingers traced the edge of the notebook absent-mindedly, a ritual that helped focus her mind. She had learned early that appearances mattered. If you seemed ordinary, no one would suspect your extraordinary capabilities. To blend in was to survive, to operate without drawing attention to oneself, and to ensure that when the moment came, action could be taken without interference. Outside, the sunlight reflected off the tarmac, glinting off the wings of waiting. Aircraft. Emma's mind flicked briefly to memories of her early training. She had been tested in conditions far harsher than this, forced to navigate complex systems, anticipate threats, and act decisively under pressure. Those drills, often grueling and relentless, had instilled in her a calm precision. Yet, sitting here among unsuspecting travelers, the weight of those years seemed almost invisible, hidden behind the mask of casual passenger behavior. As the plane began its slow ascent, Emma's thoughts shifted seamlessly between observation and calculation. She monitored her surroundings, both inside the cabin and beyond the confines of the airplane. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, distributing snacks and answering questions with practiced smiles. Conversations floated through the cabin. A debate about politics, a shared joke, the gentle hum of a child asking when they would arrive. All ordinary, all seemingly insignificant, all a stark contrast to the potential scenarios her training had prepared her for. Emma's gaze drifted to the window. Below, the city shrank into a patchwork of streets and buildings, the familiar landscape of Washington, D.C., coming into view. To most passengers, the view was a pleasant distraction. To Emma, it was data. Flight paths, wind patterns, altitudes. Her mind cataloged them without conscious effort. It was a subtle habit, one that could mean the difference between life and death in the right situation. And while no crisis had presented itself yet, her instincts remained finely tuned, waiting for the first signal that something was amiss. She turned back to the notebook and began to write not thoughts, not plans, not a diary, but detailed observations. The type that would seem innocuous to any casual observer. Seat numbers, minor incidents, subtle environmental details. A spilled coffee on 93A, a nervous tapping of fingers from 92C, the faint hum of electronics in the tray tables. All mundane, all ordinary. And yet, each observation strengthened her situational awareness, forming a mental map of the cabin, a network of potential issues and responses should a threat arise. A flight attendant approached, offering a polite greeting and a cup of coffee. Emma accepted, nodding with gratitude, but betraying no emotion beyond calm composure. She sipped slowly, her eyes flicking to the aisle, then to the seat behind her, then forward toward the cockpit. Every movement was deliberate, almost choreographed. To anyone watching, she was simply a thoughtful passenger, enjoying a moment of quiet on a routine flight. But behind that ordinary veneer was a mind continuously analyzing, calculating, and anticipating. For hours, the flight continued uneventfully, but Emma's attention never wavered. She observed minor interactions, an argument over overhead. In space, a child crying softly, the captain speaking in clipped tones to the co-pilot. Each instance was catalogued, each pattern noted. Her training had taught her that threats rarely arrive announced. They hide in plain sight, in the ordinary and mundane, until recognition and action are required. Being unnoticed was a strength, and Emma wore it like armor. Somewhere between the clouds and the contrails of other aircraft, Emma allowed herself a brief internal smile. It was a simple acknowledgement of her position, a quiet affirmation that she could exist in two worlds at once. To the passengers, she was passenger 91, a woman traveling for reasons unknown. To those who knew the truth, the call sign she carried and the training behind it represented competence, courage, and readiness for moments that demanded extraordinary skill. For now, though, it was simply a flight, a journey, and a chance to observe the ordinary while remaining exceptional. As the sun began its slow descent, casting golden light across the cabin, Emma leaned back slightly in her seat. She adjusted the strap of her bag, retrieved a small headset, and slipped it over her ears. Music played softly, masking external noise, allowing her mind to maintain focus without distraction. Every sense was engaged, every muscle relaxed, yet ready. In this ordinary setting, she practiced extraordinary patience, knowing that the world outside the cabin might never see her true self. And perhaps that was the greatest skill of all, to exist unnoticed until the moment one's actions mattered most. The announcement for an approaching storm zone came over the intercom, the captain's voice calm but firm. Emma's mind shifted instantly to protocol, contingency plans, and safety procedures. Passengers murmured uneasily, but she remained composed, eyes scanning the sky through the window. Turbulence would come, and she was ready not just for the bumps of weather, but for anything unusual hidden in the ordinary. She adjusted the notebook on her lap, ready to record, analyze, and act. For passenger 91, this was no ordinary flight. Every ordinary detail mattered because extraordinary moments often emerged where least expected. And so, the plane climbed. Steadily through the clouds, engines humming, passengers oblivious to the extraordinary potential quietly seated among them. Emma Larson, passenger 91, remained calm, vigilant, and unseen. She was, for now, just another traveler, yet every fiber of her being was ready for what was to come. This ordinary day, like so many others, had the quiet potential to become unforgettable. The gentle hum of the aircraft was suddenly interrupted by a flurry of soft, urgent tones in the cockpit. Air traffic control crackled over the intercom, their voices clipped and serious. Flight 472. We have unidentified aircraft approaching. Restricted airspace over Washington, D.C. Please maintain course and hold pattern. Additional instructions to follow. Emma Larson's eyes narrowed subtly behind her glasses. To the passengers, the announcement was just another minor disruption, another protocol to follow. A few muttered under their breaths, glanced around nervously, and returned to their tablets or phones. But for Emma, the message was a signal. Her instincts, honed through years of elite military training, shifted instantly into full alert. She reached into her small black bag beneath the seat and extracted a compact device, no larger than a smartphone. Its purpose was simple but vital: a secure communication link, encrypted and untraceable to civilian systems. Her fingers moved across it with practiced precision, entering a sequence of codes that only she and a handful of authorized personnel could use. She didn't speak. She didn't look around. She just prepared. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering snacks and checking on passengers, unaware of the tension brewing behind the unremarkable walls of their cabin. One man adjusted his neck pillow and hummed to himself. A child laughed at a cartoon, oblivious. Emma remained still, calm, her eyes scanning the instruments of the device, verifying signals, cross-referencing aircraft positions, and tracking unknown contacts. She wasn't just watching the sky. She was reading it like a map, interpreting every deviation from expected flight paths. In the skies above, 2 F-22 Raptor jets streaked through the clouds, engines blazing with controlled power. They were on intercept mode, elite pilots responding to the alert. But then, something unusual happened. One of the pilots' helmets transmitted a voice back to headquarters. Hold on. Wait, is that passenger 91? Recognition flashed across their faces. The call sign was known to only a select few in the military aviation community, an acknowledgement of years of skill, precision, and leadership that had earned respect at the highest levels. They had trained with her in simulations, witnessed her ability to remain composed under pressure, and now, unexpectedly, she was on board a commercial flight. The elite pilots adjusted their course, moving closer, communicating silently through hand signals and helmet displays that allowed them to coordinate without disturbing civilian aircraft. Emma's heart rate remained steady, but her mind raced with calculations. The approaching aircraft weren't hostile. Not yet, but anomalies had been detected in their behavior, unexpected deviations from standard flight paths that raised red flags in military airspace monitoring. She quietly transmitted her call sign through the encrypted channel embedded in her device, a simple, subtle broadcast that would alert those who needed to know without alarming civilians. Below, passengers shifted uneasily. A man glanced out the window, squinting at distant contrails. A woman clutched a tote bag, murmuring to her friend about a possible delay. Emma noted their reactions, but did not engage. Her focus remained on the potential threats above and around her, the invisible patterns of flight trajectories, and the precise timing needed to respond to any incident. Her entire being was poised at the threshold, between ordinary travel and extraordinary action. The cockpit crew of Flight 472 began consulting with each other, visibly tense. "We're cleared to maintain altitude, but these aircraft are closing fast," the co-pilot said. The captain nodded, though his eyes betrayed concern. No one yet knew that passenger 91, the woman seated near the wing, was more than a civilian observer. She remained composed, almost serene, as she monitored the approaching jets. Every calculation, every prediction, was running silently in her mind, layering awareness upon awareness. Outside, the F-22s executed their first reconnaissance pass. The pilot's eyes were trained to detect anomalies in seconds. One of them caught sight of a subtle glint through the cabin window, a movement so ordinary it could be ignored. Yet it triggered recognition. Passenger 91, the elusive, unassuming pilot who had logged thousands of hours in classified simulations, was on board. Their formation shifted subtly, a maneuver of respect, a silent acknowledgement of her presence without drawing civilian attention. Emma allowed herself a slight nod, not to the passengers, not to the crew, but to the pilots she could not see, a signal of acknowledgement. The gesture was imperceptible to anyone else, yet in the skies above, it carried meaning. It was a shared language of training, precision, and unspoken trust. Years of preparation condensed into a simple nod, and it was understood immediately by those who had earned the right to recognize it. The tension in the cockpit escalated. Radar indicated that one of the unidentified aircraft was executing unusual maneuvers. Emma leaned slightly forward, discreetly whispering to herself, running through protocols mentally. Altitude adjustments, evasive patterns, emergency landing contingencies. It was all routine, in a way routine for someone trained to anticipate what ordinary eyes would never detect. She quietly guided the cockpit crew with subtle hints embedded in her suggestions, phrasing instructions as casual advice, masking her authority behind the veil of civilian anonymity. Her internal calculations ran faster than the plane's own. Navigation system. Wind speeds, pressure changes, minor turbulence, the trajectories of the unknown aircraft, and even the behavior of other commercial flights in the vicinity, all were tracked simultaneously. Every second mattered. Every misstep could lead to catastrophe. Yet her face remained calm, her movements deliberate, measured, and seemingly unremarkable. This was her element, hidden, silent, and supremely capable. One of the F-22 pilots, flying slightly above the airliner, tapped his communications feed again. "We have visual. Passenger 91 is aboard. Maintain formation. Do not engage unless provoked." The words were precise, almost reverent. They did not need to know why she was there. They only needed to respect her presence, her skills, and the call sign that had earned their recognition. The elite formation adjusted subtly, creating a protective perimeter around the airliner without alarming anyone below. Emma sensed their presence instinctively, as if the air itself had shifted. Her training allowed her to perceive patterns invisible to ordinary humans. The protective formation gave her a quiet reassurance, a confirmation that the extraordinary recognition she received was not fleeting. She was passenger 91, and now, in the air above one of the busiest cities in the world, that number carried weight, history, and silent acknowledgement from the nation's finest pilots. In the cabin, the flight attendants noticed nothing beyond the minor turbulence. A woman in 22B asked for water. A man in 17C adjusted his glasses. Emma moved with deliberate calm, sipping from her coffee cup, turning pages in her notebook, and occasionally glancing out the window as if studying the clouds. No one suspected that the ordinary woman in seat 91 had just signaled elite military aircraft, that her quiet presence had transformed the flight into a high-stakes tableau of respect and recognition. She reflected briefly on her journey here. Years of simulations, countless hours of training, and missions completed in anonymity had all led to this moment, quiet, hidden, yet profoundly significant. The acknowledgement by the F-22 pilots was fleeting, invisible to the world below, but to her, it was a reminder that skill, courage, and composure did not require applause. Recognition could exist in silence and understanding, in the subtle nods and glances of those who truly knew. The unidentified aircraft began to adjust its course, its pattern erratic, but not overtly threatening. Emma remained vigilant, monitoring both the instruments on her device and the subtle cues from the pilots above. She noted every movement, every deviation, silently preparing for the possibility of escalation. She did not panic. She did not falter. Passenger 91 was ready to act if necessary, but for now, the situation was contained. Time seemed to stretch as the plane moved through the skies. Every passenger was immersed in their own world, blissfully unaware of the tension above them. Emma allowed herself a quiet observation of them ordinary lives continuing amid extraordinary circumstances. The contrast was striking. And yet, she knew that in moments like this, ordinary and extraordinary existed in the same space, intersecting silently, waiting for recognition, action, or acknowledgement. The F-22s maintained formation, a silent presence, as Emma prepared for any contingency. Her fingers brushed the notebook again, recording mental notes, observations, and calculations. The call sign she had quietly transmitted had done its job. The elite pilots knew she was on board. The unknown aircraft had not yet acted, and the ordinary passengers continued their mundane routines, unaware of the extraordinary reality unfolding just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Emma leaned back slightly, allowing a deep, measured breath. Her heart rate remained calm, her mind clear. This was the moment she had trained for, hidden in plain sight, unassuming, unnoticed, yet profoundly prepared. Passenger 91 was more than a seat number. She was alert, capable, and ready. The ordinary day had shifted imperceptibly, transformed by the convergence of her presence, her skills, and the elite acknowledgement that now hovered invisibly above them in the skies over Washington, D.C., and as the plane sailed steadily through the clouds, she allowed herself the briefest of smiles, quiet, private, imperceptible. Passenger 91 had made her presence known without a word, had communicated in a language only the prepared could understand, and had ensured that the extraordinary quietly existed alongside the ordinary. The ordinary flight, seemingly routine, had already begun its transformation into something unforgettable. The F-22 Raptors streaked through the sky with a disciplined elegance that made even the commercial airliner seem ponderous. Engines hummed with restrained power, almost as if the jets themselves were aware of the magnitude of the moment. The lead pilot, call sign Hawkeye, adjusted his helmet display, eyes narrowing as he processed the signal intercepted moments earlier. Passenger 91 Emma Larson was on board Flight 472. Recognition hit him with the force of sudden gravity. She wasn't just a civilian. She was an expert, a legend in certain classified circles, a professional whose skill and composure were acknowledged at the highest levels of the Air Force. Formation adjust, Hawkeye instructed, his voice calm but precise. The other pilot, call sign Viper, mirrored his movements. Their jets glided into a protective V formation around the commercial plane, maintaining a delicate balance between military precision and civilian safety. Above the clouds, sunlight glinted off their sleek bodies, reflecting a brilliance that caught Emma's attention, even from within the cabin. She noticed subtle changes in the air currents caused by the Raptor's proximity, the faint vibration of their engines transmitted through the metal frame of the airliner. No one in the cabin sensed what was happening. A child clutched a stuffed rabbit. An elderly man adjusted his hearing aid, and a young woman scrolled through her phone. But Emma saw everything. Years of training allowed her to interpret the patterns of flight, the angles of approach, the minute signals of recognition among elite pilots. This was more than procedure. It was acknowledgement. A nod, a signal, a formation shift, all designed to say, silently, "We know who you are. We respect you." Hawkeye tapped his helmet communication once more. "Viper, maintain formation. Do not engage." "She is on board." "Copy," Viper replied. He banked slightly, keeping the airliner steady between them. The precision was remarkable. Even slight miscalculations could create turbulence or, worse, panic among passengers. Yet the pilots executed it flawlessly. Emma, seated near the wing, noticed the subtle change in vibration and tilt. To the trained eye, the synchronization was unmistakable. She allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture invisible to the crew and passengers, but understood completely by the F-22 pilots. Her mind briefly flickered to memories of training exercises conducted in secret facilities. High-stakes simulations where every movement counted, where recognition by a peer or superior validated years of preparation. The Raptor pilot's recognition wasn't just courtesy, it was acknowledgement of her competence, her ability to remain calm under pressure, her unparalleled skill in anticipating threats. She remembered the hours spent analyzing flight patterns, mastering evasive maneuvers, and communicating without words. The formation above the clouds mirrored those drills perfectly. Back in the cabin, the flight attendants continued their rounds, unaware of the aerial choreography taking place. A man in seat 92 had spilled a small cup of coffee and muttered an apology. A young boy pointed excitedly at a plane outside the window, oblivious to the extraordinary aircraft slicing silently through the sky above. Emma allowed herself to smile faintly. The contrast between the ordinary and extraordinary fascinated her. Most people moved through life unaware of the hidden layers of reality surrounding them. She had lived in those layers for years. Her focus, however, was not on passengers, but on the subtle shifts in the approaching aircraft. Radar signals on her device indicated minute adjustments in their approach slight banking, precise altitude changes, a calculated proximity to her plane. These were not accidental. The pilots were signaling their awareness, executing a silent, synchronized salute. Emma, the quiet civilian in seat 91, understood immediately. She allowed her fingers to brush the notebook in her lap, tracing the edges with deliberate care, noting the pattern without needing to write. Hawkeye's voice crackled briefly over encrypted channels, inaudible to the commercial flight crew. Maintain visual on passenger 91. Confirm identification. No deviations. Respect her space. Emma's eyes flicked to the window again. The two Raptors mirrored each other on either side of the plane, engines humming at a controlled pitch, wings slicing through the sky in near-perfect symmetry. The sunlight reflected in a pattern that seemed almost choreographed, emphasizing the ceremonial nature of the recognition. She couldn't help but feel a rare surge of pride, not arrogance, but quiet acknowledgement that her years of dedication had been noticed, even if only by a select few. Inside her mind, calculations ran continuously. The formation adjustments were subtle but deliberate. The jets weren't just flying, they were communicating. Each tilt, each shift, each slight altitude correction conveyed information. We see you. We respect you. We are aware of your presence and expertise. Emma matched the signals with equally subtle acknowledgments, invisible to anyone else, a private dialogue between the skies and herself. As Flight 472 continued its path toward Washington, Emma thought about the irony of the moment. Here she was, blending in with ordinary travelers, sipping coffee, flipping through her notebook, while above, elite pilots fighters trained for combat executed a ceremonial recognition. The ordinary world moved around her obliviously. Conversations, laughter, and the occasional sneeze filled the cabin. Outside, jets sliced through the sky with precision, honoring someone invisible to the majority. The duality was both surreal and profoundly grounding. The Raptor pilots maintained formation, subtly adjusting for turbulence and wind shifts. Each correction was a silent testament to their skill and discipline. Emma felt the vibrations through the fuselage, the faint changes in cabin air pressure, and the delicate rhythm of engines above. She had encountered countless crises in simulations and classified missions, but this was unique. Recognition, without a word, without a ceremony, yet deeply meaningful. The acknowledgement validated not her ego, but her readiness, her persistence, her calm under pressure. For a brief moment, Emma allowed her thoughts to drift to her mentors and colleagues. The people who had trained her, challenged her, and occasionally doubted her ability to succeed. They had instilled in her the precision, patience, and quiet. Confidence that now manifested in this extraordinary moment. The pilots above were the culmination of that training, their actions reflecting not just professional respect, but deep, unspoken understanding. It was rare, and it was fleeting, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. Inside the cabin, the tension remained imperceptible to most passengers. A few glanced out windows, noting contrails or distant aircraft, but nothing appeared unusual. A flight attendant asked if anyone wanted another beverage. A child cried softly, and Emma offered a reassuring smile, maintaining her civilian facade perfectly. To the untrained eye, nothing extraordinary was happening. To the trained eye, everything was extraordinary: the formation, the acknowledgement, the silent communication that crossed hundreds of feet of sky. As the plane began to ascend over a higher altitude, the Raptors maintained their V formation. Emma noted their subtle banking adjustments and micro-corrections in real time, her fingers tracing imaginary lines over her notebook. This was more than observation. It was participation. She understood the rhythm, the logic, the flow. Recognition wasn't just about respect. It was about awareness, understanding, and synchronization. And in this moment, she was perfectly synchronized with the finest pilots in the nation. Hawkeye's voice returned over the secure channel. She's calm. Perfect posture. Confirmed. Visual acknowledgement. Maintain formation until cleared. Emma allowed herself a slight nod. Just a flicker of motion. Barely noticeable, but completely understood by the pilots. Their respect was quiet, measured, and earned. No cheers. No fanfare. Just pure acknowledgement of competence and composure. Years of rigorous training, countless hours of simulations, and every quiet sacrifice had led to this moment. An ordinary passenger recognized as extraordinary, not for spectacle, but for skill, courage, and unwavering presence. The plane continued its approach over Washington. Below, the city stretched out in a patchwork of streets, monuments, and rivers. Emma's attention shifted momentarily to the landscape, cataloging positions, noting key landmarks, and observing flight patterns in her periphery. Her training allowed her to integrate this data effortlessly. Meanwhile, the Raptors adjusted formation subtly, maintaining their ceremonial escort without alarming the public or the crew. It was a delicate balance of visibility and invisibility, acknowledgement and discretion. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the display shifted. One pilot banked slightly, the other mirrored perfectly, and the airliner was momentarily flanked, framed by two sleek jets in near-perfect symmetry. Was a salute, silent, precise, and beautiful. Emma responded instinctively, the smallest movement, a tilt of her head, a fleeting blink sufficient to convey acknowledgement. no one else noticed. To the world, she remained passenger 91, quiet, ordinary, unassuming. But above, recognition had been earned and received. Emma leaned back in her seat, letting herself breathe just slightly. The planes continued their escort, maintaining vigilance, but the first tension had passed. Inwardly, she reflected on the surreal convergence of ordinary life and extraordinary acknowledgement. She was a civilian, yet she had been recognized by elite combat pilots. She was invisible to the untrained eye, yet profoundly present to those who knew what to look for. It was a rare, fleeting, and unforgettable moment. Above the F-22's adjusted formation, their engines a low hum of power and precision. They communicated silently through micro-movements, helmet displays, and subtle gestures. Every nuance mattered. Every adjustment carried meaning. And Emma Larson, passenger 91, understood every signal. The ordinary world moved around them, oblivious. Conversations continued. Flight attendants smiled. Children laughed. Phones buzzed. And yet, above, the extraordinary unfolded in a quiet ballet of skill, respect, and recognition. Passenger 91, the unassuming woman in seat 91, had transformed a routine flight into a secret tableau of acknowledgement, invisibly celebrated by the most elite pilots in the sky. And in that perfect silent moment, Emma allowed herself a quiet, internal smile. She had been seen, not for fame, not for recognition by the masses, but for skill, precision, and composure, the qualities that mattered most. The ordinary flight, seemingly mundane, had already become unforgettable. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden streaks across the cabin of Flight 472. The light refracted through the window panels, highlighting specks of dust floating in the air, yet none of the passengers noticed. The ordinary flight had begun its descent into the extraordinary. Above the clouds, the F-22 Raptors maintained their formation, sleek silhouettes against the sunlit sky, engines humming a precise, almost ceremonial rhythm. Their presence was invisible to the untrained eye, but to Emma Larson, seated in her unassuming middle seat, every vibration, every angle, every micro-adjustment spoke volumes. She sipped from her cup of coffee, seemingly calm, though her eyes flickered repeatedly toward the subtle changes in the airframe vibrations. The lead jet Hawkeye had initiated a precise maneuver, a slight tilt, a near-perfect bank in unison, with vapor that was not required for ordinary interception. It was deliberate, it was acknowledgement, and it was a salute. Emma's hand rested lightly on her notebook. Her mind, trained to analyze every detail, absorbed the silent choreography. Above, the jets weren't just flying. They were speaking a language only she could understand. Respect, recognition, and trust communicated entirely without words. Years of secret missions, rigorous training, and countless simulations had built toward this exact moment, though she had never anticipated it would occur so publicly, yet so invisibly. Passengers around her remained oblivious. A man in the aisle muttered about a delayed schedule. A young mother adjusted her baby's seatbelt. A child pointed excitedly out the window, unaware that the sky outside was witnessing an extraordinary display of skill and acknowledgement. Emma allowed herself the faintest, imperceptible nod. It was invisible to the untrained observer, yet perfectly understood by the pilots maintaining their formation around the plane. The Raptor's movements were subtle but precise. Each tilt, each bank, each shift in altitude was a message. We recognize you. We honor your skill. Emma mirrored their signals in her own wastelight, almost imperceptible gestures that only the trained eye or a participant in the shared understanding would notice. It was a conversation without sound, a dialogue of trust, respect, and acknowledgement. Memories flooded her mind as she studied the display. She remembered countless simulations in which she had been the focus, scenarios where her calm under pressure had determined success. She recalled mentors and colleagues who had tested her, pushed her limits, and occasionally doubted her capabilities. They had instilled discipline, patience, and composure, all of which now converged in this singular moment. She wasn't performing for the world. She was recognized by those who understood what mattered, the elite pilots in the sky above, operating in silence. The co-pilot of Flight 472 glanced up briefly at the wing, sensing the shift in air currents, but remaining unaware of the extraordinary presence above. "Did you feel that?" he asked. The captain shrugged. "Probably just turbulence. Keep steady." Emma smiled faintly at the subtle difference. Turbulence, she knew, could be manufactured by the massive air displacement of jets flying in formation. It was deliberate, controlled, and perfect. Outside, the F-22s adjusted their formation to frame the airliner symmetrically between them. The sun caught the wings of the jets, creating dazzling reflections. Emma's eyes flickered to each plane in turn, noting minor adjustments in speed and trajectory. It was not random. It was a salute, a precise, ceremonial acknowledgement executed flawlessly at altitude. For a fleeting moment, the sky itself seemed transformed, golden light reflecting off steel and glass in a silent dance choreographed for one person. Passenger 91. Emma felt a quiet swell of emotion. Not pride, not arrogance, but a profound acknowledgement of a lifetime of preparation. Every sacrifice, every moment spent in rigorous training, every test of nerves and skill had culminated in this instant. The pilots above were performing for no one but her. And yet, the world below, passengers, city streets, news channels, would remain unaware. It was a moment of pure, unspoken validation. Her thoughts flickered briefly to her mentors. The men and women who had pushed her, who had guided her hands and her mind, and who had instilled in her the knowledge that the quiet, invisible acts often mattered most. This salute, executed with precision and respect, embodied everything they had taught her. It was a recognition not for fame or accolades, but for skill, composure, and trust earned through years of dedication. The plane shuddered slightly as air currents shifted, a subtle ripple transmitted through the fuselage. Emma adjusted her posture slightly, perfectly in sync with the movement, mirroring the rhythm of the pilots above. She understood the importance of symmetry, of timing, of precision. The jet's movements were almost imperceptible from the cabin, yet she felt every adjustment through her senses honed by years of experience. It was a silent conversation in 3 dimensions. Hawkeye's voice, transmitted only through encrypted channels, confirmed the maneuver. Perfect. Maintain formation. She is aware. No deviation. Viper mirrored the lead's movements, wings aligning almost poetically with the sun's angle, forming a frame around Flight 472. Emma allowed herself a subtle tilt of the head, the faintest acknowledgement, and the pilots understood completely. In the sky above Washington, a dialogue of skill and recognition was unfolding, invisible to the ordinary world below. Inside the cabin, passengers remained oblivious. Conversations continued. Phones buzzed. Children played. Flight attendants offered snacks. Nothing seemed extraordinary to the casual observer. But Emma knew differently. Every vibration, every tilt, every micro-adjustment was deliberate. She felt a quiet thrill, a rare, private affirmation of her competence and of the recognition she had earned. This was her moment, fleeting and invisible, yet profoundly significant. Her thoughts drifted to the extraordinary contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Here she was, drinking coffee and flipping through her notebook, blending seamlessly with civilians, while above, elite pilots executed a silent ceremonial salute. The world around her was mundane, yet she had stepped into a hidden reality, layered with precision, skill, and acknowledgement. It was a paradox she had learned to inhabit over years of dual existence. Emma's mind shifted back to tactical awareness. She maintained full observation of the flight patterns around her, prepared for contingencies, yet her emotions lingered in the quiet recognition. It was unusual to feel acknowledgement without spectacle. There were no cameras, no applause, no witnesses beyond the trained pilots above. And yet, the significance was undeniable. She had been seen in the way that truly mattered. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a deep amber. The jets adjusted again, subtly framing the plane in a perfect diagonal of light and shadow. Emma's fingers brushed her notebook instinctively, tracing the imagined lines of alignment in the air. Her breath remained steady. She had mastered composure through years of preparation, yet this moment carried a quiet thrill, a reminder that even in anonymity, recognition could exist in silence. Hawkeye's voice, again over the secure channel, added a final note of affirmation. Formation steady. She is acknowledged. Maintain position until landing clearance. Viper mirrored the movement with precision. Emma allowed herself a barely perceptible exhale, the slightest shift of her hand across her lap, and the silent conversation was complete. Respect had been communicated, acknowledged, and returned. The ordinary passengers continued their routines. Some laughing, some dozing, some engrossed in screens. No one could have guessed that Flight 472 had become the site of a secret ceremonial recognition, a ballet of precision and acknowledgement performed entirely for one individual. Emma Larson, passenger 91, remained calm, ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in presence. And as the plane continued toward Washington, the salute persisted. It was a fleeting, invisible celebration of skill, discipline, and dedication, a private moment shared between a passenger and the elite pilots who understood her legacy. Emma's faint smile reflected not ego, but gratitude, for training, for mentors, for colleagues, and for the rare acknowledgement that transcended applause. In the skies above, she had been seen. The ordinary day had transformed into an extraordinary moment of silent honor. And for passenger 91, it would remain unforgettable. The hum of Flight 472 had settled into a steady rhythm, the plane slicing smoothly through the clouds. Passengers adjusted in their seats, some dozing, some scrolling through their devices, utterly unaware of the extraordinary events unfolding just beyond their perception. Emma Larson leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the window, but her mind was far from the sky outside. It traveled backward, tracing the years of preparation, discipline, and training that had shaped her into the calm, composed passenger 91 seated among ordinary travelers. She remembered the first day she had entered the military academy. The towering gates, the rigid formations, the sharp commands echoing across the drill field, it had all been intimidating, almost overwhelming. Yet beneath the discipline and strict rules, there had been a promise, the cultivation of skill, precision, and resilience beyond ordinary comprehension. Emma had approached it with a mixture of awe and determination, knowing that to survive and excel she would need to embrace every challenge fully, without hesitation. Early mornings had begun before dawn, the cold air biting at her skin as she ran laps around the training ground. Sweat drenched her uniform, and every muscle ached, but failure was not permitted. Each drill, each exercise, was designed to strip away weakness, to condition her mind and body to respond instinctively under pressure. Her instructors were relentless, punishing mistakes with both physical and mental rigor. It had been exhausting, terrifying at times, but Emma discovered something within herself, an unwavering persistence, a determination that did not bend under stress. The memory shifted to the simulator room's dark, quiet chambers where every decision carried weight. She had spent hours at the controls, navigating virtual skies, reacting to threats invisible to the casual eye. Explosions, evasive maneuvers, and emergency protocols repeated endlessly until reflex supplanted thought. She recalled the moments when simulations blurred with reality, when her mind became a machine of prediction and calculation. These exercises had honed her instincts, training her to notice patterns, anticipate behavior, and act decisively without hesitation. Those countless hours were invisible to the world, yet they formed the foundation of her extraordinary capabilities. Emma's thoughts wandered further to her instructor's mentors, who challenged her relentlessly, pushing her to exceed every expectation. Some questioned her potential, some pushed her toward physical limits, and others tested her mental acuity under extreme stress. She had learned to listen, to observe, and to adapt. Every piece of advice, every critique, every calculated failure became a lesson, a stepping stone toward mastery. These memories, vivid and precise, reminded her why she had earned the call, sign that now commanded silent recognition in the skies. She thought of the team exercises, where coordination and trust were paramount. Communication without words, precision in every movement, and synchronization with teammates had been essential. She remembered the drills where a single mistake could unravel an entire mission scenario, where one misjudgment meant simulated failure or even virtual casualties. These exercises had taught her the subtle language of trust and recognition. The gestures, nods, and signals that conveyed understanding beyond words. That same language now played out above Flight 472, invisible to all but her and the elite pilots. Even the grueling physical endurance tests had shaped her. She recalled endless obstacle courses, timed sprints, and climbing drills that demanded both strength and strategy. Muscles screamed, lungs burned, and sweat dripped, but each obstacle reinforced resilience. She had learned to operate under fatigue, to maintain focus when every fiber of her body wanted to quit. That resilience now allowed her to remain calm, while the world around her seemed oblivious, while elite pilots executed a silent salute in recognition of the skills those years had forged. The memory of advanced flight simulations brought a quiet smile to her lips. In those rooms, she had faced unpredictable weather, hostile threats, and complex air traffic patterns. She had learned to anticipate every potential variable: turbulence, equipment failure, miscommunication, and adversary tactics. It had seemed abstract then, theoretical, but now she recognized the relevance. Every simulation had prepared her for moments when the ordinary world intersected with extraordinary events. Flight 472, the F-22 pilots, the unassuming passengers. Element fit perfectly into scenarios she had trained for countless times. Her thoughts drifted to the psychological conditioning she had endured. Stress inoculation, situational awareness, and decision-making under extreme pressure were drilled into her daily life. She had learned to compartmentalize emotion, focus on tasks with precision, and anticipate threats without panic. These lessons had taught her to survive and thrive when circumstances defied expectations. Now, as Passenger 91, she relied on those same skills silently, calmly, observing the sky, reading the air currents, and acknowledging the subtle signs of recognition from the elite pilots above. Emma remembered the night drills flying simulations. In complete darkness, relying solely on instruments, instinct, and training. The monotony of the night sky, punctuated by flashing signals and simulated threats, had tested her patience, endurance, and attention to detail. Each night had honed her capacity to remain calm, focused, and precise under pressure. That same capacity now guided her movements, gestures, and awareness aboard Flight 472, ensuring that every signal, every nod, and every observation maintained the delicate balance between ordinary passenger and extraordinary operator. Her thoughts drifted to the camaraderie of her peers, those who had trained alongside her, pushed her, supported her, and occasionally challenged her authority. Had understood the subtle bonds forged in shared adversity, the silent acknowledgement of skill and capability. It was a language without words, a recognition of competence earned through sweat, effort, and experience. That same language now existed between Emma and the F-22 pilots above. It was invisible to the passengers, irrelevant to the world outside, yet profoundly meaningful to those who understood it. Emma's reflection turned inward, contemplating the personal sacrifices that had accompanied her achievements. Friendships missed, family gatherings skipped, and countless hours of solitary study and practice had been traded for mastery. Each sacrifice had shaped her discipline, her patience, and her resilience. It had been lonely at times, isolating, but the rewards had been intangible yet powerful. That training had prepared her not just for recognition, but for action. And now, as the jets above maintained their ceremonial escort, she realized that every choice, every sacrifice, had been worthwhile. Even in the midst of memories, Emma remained fully present in the flight. Her eyes scanned the instruments, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of her notebook, her mind integrating data from radar, air currents, and the vibrations through the fuselage. The training she remembered, every drill, every simulation, every physical and mental challenge was being applied in real time. Recognition had arrived silently, but she was fully capable of action if needed. She existed in the balance between observation and readiness. The ordinary passengers continued their routines, unaware of the extraordinary context enveloping them. A woman adjusted her seat, a man read a book, a child dropped a toy that bounced harmlessly onto the aisle. Emma allowed herself a brief moment of amusement at the mundane world coexisting with her hidden reality. She had learned to compartmentalize, to observe the ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously. This duality had been a constant companion, through training and now manifested perfectly in her current situation. Emma's thoughts returned to the F-22 pilots above. Their movements, perfectly synchronized and precise, mirrored the silent communications she had learned in simulations. Each adjustment, each tilt, each bank was deliberate, controlled, and meaningful. Recognition was not casual. It was earned, understood, and returned. Passenger 91, the unassuming traveler, had achieved acknowledgement not through spectacle, but through skill, composure, and preparation honed over years of relentless effort. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden and amber streaks across the cabin, Emma felt a quiet affirmation. The years of rigorous training, the sacrifices, the mental and physical fortitude, and the unyielding focus had culminated in a singular moment of acknowledgement. She had been seen in a manner that truly mattered, not for applause, not for fame, but for competence, courage, and the quiet excellence that only the trained eye could recognize. The plane continued its path, the hum steady, the cabin unaware, and Emma allowed herself a final reflection. Every lesson, every drill, every moment of preparation had been necessary to stand here, unassuming yet fully capable. Recognition had arrived silently in the form of 2 elite fighter jets, a perfect formation, and the subtle acknowledgement of professionals who understood her skill. She was Passenger 91, ordinary to the world, extraordinary in the skies. In this moment, she allowed herself to breathe fully, knowing the past had prepared her for this present. Every early morning, every grueling simulation, every challenge faced with discipline and composure had led to this balance of invisibility and recognition. And though the passengers would never know, Emma Larson, Passenger 91, understood. The ordinary day had transformed, enriched by silent recognition and a lifetime of preparation. And for Emma, this acknowledgement, invisible to the world, had become a defining moment, a culmination of years of dedication and mastery. The serene, hum of Flight 472, which had lulled passengers into a sense of normalcy, suddenly felt charged with unseen tension. Emma Larson remained seated near the window, calm on the surface, yet every nerve in her body was alert. The subtle vibrations through the fuselage had changed ever so slightly, a shift so small most would not notice. To her trained senses, however, it was enough. Something was approaching something that did not belong in ordinary airspace. Her fingers instinctively brushed over the small encrypted device tucked inside her bag. The F-22s above maintained formation, signaling silent recognition, but even their skill would not be sufficient if the anomaly she detected escalated. Emma leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning both cabin and sky, heart steady, mind calculating. This was a test, not just of skill, but of instinct honed through years of training. Outside, the two Raptors glinted in the fading sunlight, their silhouettes cutting sharply against the amber sky. Hawkeye and Viper maintained their positions flawlessly, yet even their elite piloting was momentarily challenged by the unexpected. The unidentified aircraft was now visible on radar, fast, unpredictable, and with flight patterns that defied standard protocols. Emma's pulse remained calm. Recognition was one thing. Imminent danger was another. And this was the first sign of the latter. She recalled her training in high-stress threat assessment, patterns of deviation, speed anomalies, unexpected course adjustments. Every simulation she had endured had prepared her for moments just like this, when calm observation, swift calculation, and immediate action determined outcomes. Her eyes flicked to the window, tracking the approaching aircraft through the small pane of reinforced glass. Even from this distance, she could anticipate its trajectory, calculate its speed, and estimate potential impact zones. The cabin remained blissfully unaware. A child leaned over to show his tablet to a neighbor. A man whispered into his phone. A woman adjusted her scarf. The ordinary world carried on, untouched by the extraordinary tension above. Emma allowed herself a quiet, inward smile. It was remarkable, almost surreal, how ordinary life persisted amid the extraordinary. Every skill she had honed depended on this duality, being invisible to most, while acutely aware of the hidden currents around her. The device in her bag beeped softly, signaling encrypted communications from the monitoring network. She tapped the screen, receiving detailed positional updates. The approaching aircraft was maneuvering unusually, its path seemingly erratic yet precise. It wasn't merely a random flight pattern. It was calculated, deliberate, and potentially hostile. Emma's mind whirred through countermeasures, risk assessment, and potential protocols. Each option had consequences, and every decision needed to be precise. "Captain, we're detecting an unusual aircraft approaching our path," the co-pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Radar shows rapid adjustments. Could be a civilian issue, maybe weather, but it's odd." The captain nodded, but said nothing, his focus on maintaining steady flight. Emma intercepted the comms, her voice calm and measured as she suggested minor adjustments. Slight elevation change, 2 degrees. Maintain speed. Monitor for turbulence anomalies. Her words were phrased as casual advice, ordinary guidance, from a passenger concerned about comfort, but every suggestion was calculated for maximum effect. The F-22 pilots above altered formation subtly. The salute and acknowledgement shifted seamlessly into a defensive posture. Hawkeye signaled Viper, with a micro-adjustment, silently confirming the strategy without alarming the airliner or passengers. Emma tracked every move, integrating their maneuvers with her own calculations. This was no longer ceremonial. This was active defense. And she was at the center, calm and precise, guiding the situation through invisible expertise. The unidentified aircraft's speed increased, its trajectory growing more erratic. Emma's mind moved faster than the radar. She calculated potential intercept points, evasive maneuvers, and the safest altitude for the passengers. Her fingers brushed the notebook on her lap, tracing imaginary grids and plotting the approaching threat's path. Years of training in high-pressure decision-making made her immune to panic. She operated with a clarity and calm few could understand. Time seemed to stretch. Outside the cabin, sunlight danced across the clouds, glinting off the metal of the airliner and the distant jets. Emma felt the subtle vibration intensify again, signaling a shift in wind currents caused by the approaching craft. It was almost imperceptible, but her senses caught every nuance. The moment required precision, restraint, and judgment. One wrong move could trigger panic in the cabin, compromise the formation, or escalate the situation beyond control. She recalled another training scenario midnight exercises simulating hostile approaches over civilian airspace. The exercises had stressed her beyond fatigue, testing both mental acuity and physical endurance. Decisions had to be made within seconds, and the consequences were immediate. Now, in the skies above Washington, she faced a real-world scenario that mirrored those simulations. Calm, silent, and precise observation was paramount. The F-22s maintained protective positions, subtly signaling to the approaching aircraft that Flight 472 was not to be engaged. Emma's presence, indicated by her encrypted call sign, had caused hesitation, an acknowledgement recognized only by those trained to notice. Yet the anomaly pressed forward, its flight path unpredictable. Emma calculated the vectors, predicted its next move, and prepared contingencies in parallel, a mental symphony of probabilities and precision. Inside the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the tension. A flight attendant asked if anyone wanted additional refreshments. Emma smiled politely, answered briefly, and returned to observation. Maintaining ordinary behavior was part of the protocol. Panic, hesitation, or even curiosity could compromise the subtle advantage she now held. To the world, she was just passenger 91, quietly taking notes. To the trained eye, she was the calm epicenter of a rapidly escalating aerial situation. The unidentified aircraft suddenly executed a sharp maneuver, diving slightly, then banking sharply to the right. Emma's mind calculated impact trajectories instantly. She suggested another minor adjustment to the captain, phrasing it as ordinary. Advice: slight left bank, adjust by 1 degree to compensate. The aircraft responded with seamless precision. Passengers remained oblivious. Emma's calm voice, her casual demeanor, and her subtle calculations were steering the situation without drawing attention. Above, the F-22s mirrored the maneuvers, flanking Flight 472 to maintain a defensive perimeter. Their jets moved in perfect coordination with the airliner's subtle adjustments, a silent ballet of protection and strategy. Emma tracked every minute change, noting wind shifts, engine vibrations, and minor turbulence. Every variable mattered. Every detail required integration into her mental map. She had trained for scenarios just like this, and now the theory was reality. The radar beeped again. The unknown aircraft had shifted slightly off course, yet its proximity was dangerous. Emma's mind raced through contingencies, evasive maneuvers, altitude adjustments, emergency communications, and coordination. With the F-22s, each decision needed to balance safety, stealth, and precision. Her pulse remained calm, her movements deliberate, and her focus absolute. Suddenly, the device in her bag vibrated with an alert, a direct acknowledgement from the command network. Emma's presence and awareness were now officially recognized. At the highest level, backup measures were ready, airborne support was on standby, and yet she remained the immediate point of guidance. Her training had prepared her for both recognition and responsibility. She absorbed the information silently, integrating it into her calculations without a single visible reaction. As the anomaly drew closer, Emma's thoughts returned to the previous fundamentals of her preparation: anticipation, observation, and calculated response. She visualized every path, every maneuver, every option, and prioritized outcomes to maximize safety for the passengers and crew. The ordinary world remained unaware below, but in the skies above Washington, extraordinary skill and calm precision converged, anchored by a woman in seat 91. The unknown aircraft executed another unpredictable maneuver, dipping slightly toward Flight 472 before stabilizing. Emma anticipated the movement, suggested a minor adjustment, and the captain complied seamlessly. The Raptor pilots maintained formation, their presence both protective and communicative. Every element worked in harmony, orchestrated by experience, intuition, and invisible acknowledgement. Time stretched in a suspended rhythm of awareness. Emma, serene yet fully engaged, tracked every variable, adjusted predictions instantly, and guided the situation with subtle precision. The ordinary passengers continued their routines. Children giggled, adults chatted, and flight attendants moved with practiced smiles, but the air itself vibrated with tension. Every moment mattered, every second a potential pivot between normalcy and crisis. And yet, amid the tension, Emma remained passenger 91, calm, composed, and extraordinarily prepared. The anomaly approached, but she had calculated every contingency. She had been trained for this. She had been recognized by the finest pilots in the nation. She had experience, instinct, and skill converging in the perfect equilibrium. And now, as the unknown aircraft prepared its next move, she was ready. The tension in the cabin of Flight 472 was subtle yet palpable. To the ordinary passenger, it was indistinguishable from the occasional turbulence or minor bumps of high-altitude flight. But to Emma Larson, every vibration, every air current shift, and every distant radar blip told a story of a threat moving faster and more unpredictably than anyone could comprehend. She sat poised, calm on the surface, yet every nerve in her body was alert. The moment had come. Recognition had been given. Training had prepared her. Now action was required. Her fingers hovered over the small, encrypted device in her bag. It was a sophisticated piece of technology, capable of secure communication, threat analysis, and coordination with the F-22 formation above. Emma tapped quickly, entering codes that opened a direct line to the pilots. The secure channel was silent, invisible to the world, a bridge of instantaneous communication between her and the elite aircraft protecting the plane. Her call sign Passenger 91 blipped quietly into their systems, confirming her presence and authority. Outside, the unknown aircraft continued its erratic approach. Its speed fluctuated, and its flight path showed signs of deliberate maneuvering, almost as if it were testing the airspace, probing for weakness. Emma analyzed the patterns with meticulous precision. She anticipated its trajectory, calculated wind shifts, and mapped multiple possible outcomes. Her mind ran simulations in real time, recalling every maneuver she had learned during years of classified training. This was no longer ceremonial or observational. This was a critical decision. Point. Hawkeye, adjust to intercept at 20 degrees offset. Viper, flank right and maintain altitude. She instructed over the encrypted line, her voice calm but commanding. The pilots above acknowledged instantly, executing the moves with surgical precision. Emma's mental map integrated their positions, the plane's movement, and the anomaly's speed. She calculated the margin for error, the timing, and the optimal maneuver to neutralize the threat without alarming passengers or risking collision. The co-pilot glanced up, sensing the unusual vibration again. Captain, wind currents? Something odd, but nothing to worry about. Emma smiled faintly, masking her urgency. Minor turbulence. Slight adjustments recommended, she said. Her tone casual, masking the command underlying every word. Every phrase was designed to guide, to stabilize, to maintain the illusion of ordinary flight while orchestrating extraordinary defense. The unknown aircraft made a sharp turn, suddenly, diving toward the airliner before leveling off. Emma's eyes flicked to the window, tracking its progress. Time slowed, each second a thread in the intricate tapestry of potential outcomes. She ran multiple contingency plans simultaneously: evasive maneuvers, altitude adjustments, and coordination. With the Raptors, every calculation was precise, every recommendation deliberate. Failure was not an option. Hawkeye, initiate intercept vector alpha. Viper, cover right flank. Maintain 200-foot buffer, she instructed. The F-22s moved like shadows in perfect coordination, closing the gap between themselves and the unknown craft, while simultaneously shielding Flight 472. Emma noted the subtle vibrations through the fuselage air displacement, controlled turbulence, from the jet's supersonic-like precision. She smiled internally. Her decades of training in simulations and real-world scenarios had led to this moment of perfect application. Inside the cabin, passengers remained blissfully unaware. A child dropped a toy. A man sipped coffee. A woman adjusted her scarf. The ordinary continued as Emma orchestrated the extraordinary, balancing perception and action. She reflected briefly on the irony: a civilian facade shielding a battlefield in the sky. Her dual existence, ordinary passenger and elite-trained operator, had converged flawlessly. The unknown aircraft made another unpredictable maneuver, swinging slightly left, testing both the airliner and the protective formation above. Emma's fingers traced an imaginary grid over her notebook, each stroke a calculation of vectors, timing, and speed. Maintain 2 degrees left, slight elevation increase. Cabin clearance confirmed, she instructed over the channel, translating complex commands into words that sounded ordinary, even trivial, but carried immense tactical weight. Hawkeye and Viper responded instantly, executing maneuvers that positioned them strategically above and beside the airliner, creating a barrier of air superiority. Emma's mind integrated their movements with the threat trajectory, calculating the precise moment for intervention. She monitored every variable: altitude, speed, air currents, and the passengers' positions. Each second was critical. Precision would determine safety, success, and survival. The unknown aircraft descended again, its path aggressive but measured. Emma leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, her instructions casual but precise. Adjust by half a degree. Minor banking. Correction. Maintain speed. The pilots executed flawlessly, shifting the formation just enough to intercept the anomaly without disturbing the airliner's stability. Every movement was choreographed, a silent ballet of strategy and skill, invisible to all but those who knew what to observe. Her mind flashed back to previous high-stakes training exercises, simulations where milliseconds separated success from catastrophic failure. She recalled instructors stressing the importance of composure, observation, and silent command. Now, all those lessons crystallized in the current scenario. Every instinct, every calculation, every protocol aligned perfectly. The ordinary passengers below remained unaware of the high-stakes drama unfolding above their heads. Emma's pulse remained steady. Her gaze flicked from the window to the device, analyzing real-time data feeds and integrating them with visual observations. The anomaly's flight path continued to shift erratically, but the pattern was becoming discernible, a faint signature of predictable behavior emerging from chaos. She prepared her final calculation for the decisive intercept. Maneuver. Timing, angle, altitude, and velocity were all critical. Precision was paramount. Hawkeye final intercept vector. Position above, 15 degrees ahead. Viper, flank, and mirror. Execute containment. No engagement unless provoked, she instructed. Voice calm, masking the intensity of the moment. The pilots acknowledged with near-instant precision. The Raptors moved into position with flawless coordination, forming a protective barrier that would neutralize the threat while maintaining civilian safety. Emma monitored the effect of their movements on the airliner. Cabin vibrations were minimal. Turbulence almost imperceptible. Passengers continued routines as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Emma allowed herself a faint smile, appreciating the irony. She was orchestrating a life-saving ballet, invisible to the audience below, yet entirely visible in her mind's eye. The unknown aircraft hesitated, seemingly recognizing the protective formation. Emma's calculations confirmed the moment of maximum leverage. She adjusted one final parameter. Slight elevation correction. Maintain 2-degree buffer. Target. Neutralized if deviation persists. Her voice remained casual, but the implication was unmistakable to the pilots above. Hawkeye executed the final maneuver. Viper mirrored seamlessly. The unknown aircraft, confronted with the invisible barrier and precise positioning of the Raptors, veered sharply away, retreating from restricted airspace. Emma's mental simulations confirmed that the trajectory would lead the anomaly far from the airliner without the need for engagement. Calm, calculated, and precise action had neutralized the threat without a single shot fired. Inside the cabin, the ordinary passengers remained unaware. A man adjusted his reading glasses. A child laughed at a cartoon. A flight attendant offered snacks. The world below had no idea that a potentially catastrophic threat had been intercepted, neutralized, and averted, all orchestrated by a calm, unassuming passenger 91. Emma leaned back, letting her breath flow evenly. Her hands rested on the notebook in her lap, tracing the edges with practiced ease. The F-22s maintained a final protective formation until the unknown aircraft was fully out of range. Hawkeye signaled Viper, then adjusted course to escort Flight 472 until it reached safe airspace. Emma observed the maneuver, internalizing the subtle perfection of every adjustment. Recognition had transformed into action. What began as a ceremonial acknowledgement became an operational partnership. Passenger 91, unnoticed and ordinary in appearance, had guided the flight through an invisible threat with expertise earned over years of rigorous training. The ordinary world remained oblivious. But in the sky above Washington, extraordinary skill and calm precision had prevailed. For a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to reflect. Every simulation, every training drill, every moment of preparation had prepared her for this exact sequence. Recognition had brought attention, but skill had achieved results. She remained calm, collected, and invisible to the untrained eye, yet profoundly effective. Passenger 91 had fulfilled her role, silent but indispensable, blending seamlessly into the ordinary, while commanding. The extraordinary dot, the sun dipped lower, casting the cabin in amber light. Emma allowed herself a quiet, private acknowledgement of her success. The unknown threat had been neutralized. The Raptor's final adjustments completed. The airliner remained stable, passengers unaware, and the sky above Washington had returned to normalcy. Invisibility and acknowledgement coexisted perfectly. And in that suspended moment, Emma Larson, passenger 91, realized something profound. True recognition was not about applause, visibility, or fame. It was about skill, composure, and the quiet knowledge that extraordinary action could occur without fanfare, and that ordinary life could persist undisturbed in its wake. Asterisk. The sky above Washington had settled into a calm, muted glow, the sun. dipping low behind the horizon and painting the clouds in hues of amber and violet. Flight 472 glided steadily toward the airport, its passengers entirely unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded above them. Emma Larson, seated quietly in 91B, allowed herself the faintest exhale. Her heart rate had returned to its steady rhythm, her body relaxed but fully aware. The tension had passed. The unknown aircraft had been neutralized. And yet the moment carried a weight that transcended relief. It was a profound, private acknowledgement of skill, courage, and dedication. Her fingers brushed lightly over the notebook in her lap. It contained scribbles, sketches, calculations, and observations made during the flight, a combination of casual notes and tactical documentation. To anyone else, it might appear trivial or mundane. To Emma, it was a testament to a lifetime of preparation, training, and silent perseverance. Every detail of the past, every simulation, every physical and mental exercise had converged here, in this single flight, at this single moment. The realization stirred a quiet pride within her, a recognition that transcended accolades or applause. Above, the F-22 Raptors maintained a protective escort until the airspace was confirmed secure. Hawkeye signaled Viper, then executed a series of subtle aerial gestures, a final salute, visible only to the trained eye or the intended recipient. Emma's lips curved in a subtle, nearly imperceptible smile. She acknowledged the gesture with a slight nod, an intimate dialogue of recognition shared between the sky and herself. Passenger 91, once ordinary to the world, had become the center of a silent, extraordinary acknowledgement, a private ceremony of respect between professionals. The cabin remained normal, undisturbed. A man adjusted his newspaper. A young girl sipped juice. A flight attendant offered a warm smile. Ordinary life persisted around Emma, and she allowed herself to sink briefly into the contrast, the serene, mundane reality coexisting with the invisible drama she had navigated. It was a paradox she had come to embrace over years of dual existence, blending seamlessly into the ordinary, while commanding the extraordinary in moments that demanded it. Her thoughts drifted back to the first time she had been recognized in training, a nod from a mentor, a whispered acknowledgement from a peer, a subtle validation of skill. Those moments had always been fleeting, yet profoundly meaningful. And now, in the skies above Washington, the silent acknowledgement from the F-22 pilots was a culmination of years of dedication, effort, and discipline. Recognition, she realized, was not about spectacle. It was about understanding, trust, and the quiet affirmation of competence. Emma glanced briefly out the window. The sun's reflection on the wing created a dazzling pattern, a fleeting reminder of the ephemeral beauty of the moment. It was the same beauty she had learned to find in high-stakes simulations, in rigorous training, and in moments of extreme focus. The difference now was permanence in memory, the understanding that the ordinary world could continue entirely oblivious, while she had been fully engaged in extraordinary action. She allowed herself a private smile, a small celebration of skill, courage, and precision. The encrypted device in her bag vibrated once more, signaling a secure acknowledgement from the command network. Backup teams had confirmed the anomaly's retreat. Airspace protocols were restored, and all systems indicated normalcy. Emma accessed the brief, secure message. Recognition confirmed. Excellent execution. Passenger 91 acknowledged. Return to civilian protocol. Her fingers tapped a quick response of acknowledgement, casual in tone, but precise in intent. The ordinary and extraordinary coexisted perfectly in her world. Her mind wandered to the passengers around her. They remained entirely unaware that Flight 472 had just been shielded from a potentially catastrophic threat. A child leaned against the window, smiling at a passing cloud, A woman adjusted her headphones. A man dozed lightly, lulled by the rhythmic hum of engines. Emma's dual awareness allowed her to experience two realities simultaneously: the ordinary life of the cabin and the extraordinary mastery of the sky above. Both existed, perfectly balanced, and both were beautiful in their own ways. She reflected on the nature of recognition. Throughout her training and career, she had learned that true acknowledgement rarely came in applause, fanfare, or public attention. It came in subtle gestures, shared understanding, and silent affirmation of capability. The nod from a mentor, the precise movements of a colleague in formation, the slight tilt of a head in acknowledgement, these were the moments that mattered most. And today, Passenger 91 had received that acknowledgement from the finest pilots. In the nation that the F-22s began to disengage, rising and banking smoothly as they prepared to return to base. Emma watched them for a moment, noting every detail of their formation, every subtle micro-adjustment. Even as the immediate danger passed, she recognized the skill, discipline, and trust required to maintain such precise coordination. Her own training had prepared her to interpret and integrate these gestures seamlessly, allowing the ordinary flight to remain uninterrupted while extraordinary measures occurred above. The final approach to the airport began, the city stretching beneath, the plane in an intricate web of streets, monuments, and rivers. Emma observed quietly, cataloging positions, noting landmarks, and integrating the airspace into her mental map. Even in this reflective moment, her mind remained alert, a product of years of rigorous preparation. She understood that awareness and composure were lifelong practices, not just responses to immediate threats. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane descended, and passengers adjusted accordingly. Some prepared for landing, fastening seatbelts and gathering belongings. Emma remained seated, her notebook closed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She felt the subtle vibration of the landing gear deploying, the engines adjusting for descent, and the wind currents shifting. Every observation was routine yet extraordinary, a final acknowledgement of her ability to balance observation, action, and composure. A flight attendant passed by, smiling. "Almost there, folks. We'll be landing shortly." Emma nodded politely, her demeanor casual, ordinary, and perfectly composed. She had navigated recognition, threat, and extraordinary coordination without drawing attention or disrupting the mundane lives around her. In that moment, she embodied the paradox of Passenger 91, ordinary, invisible, yet profoundly capable. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, tires screeching softly against the tarmac, Emma allowed herself a deep, controlled breath. The journey had been extraordinary, yet invisible. Recognition had been given and received. A threat had been neutralized without chaos, and the ordinary world persisted seamlessly around her. Passenger 91 had fulfilled her role, blending perfectly into the civilian experience while orchestrating extraordinary outcomes. Once the plane taxied to the gate and came to a stop, passengers began to disembark. Emma rose calmly, adjusted her coat, and followed the flow of travelers. She moved with purpose, but with an air of ordinariness that masked the extraordinary events she had just navigated. Recognition and reflection intertwined silently within her, a private acknowledgement of a moment that few would ever know, but that would remain vivid in her memory forever. The F-22s had returned to base, their pilots carrying the memory of a precise, silent acknowledgement. Emma knew the gesture would be understood only in its context, a private ceremony in the sky for one extraordinary individual disguised as an ordinary passenger. Passenger 91 had not sought recognition, and yet it had been granted in the purest form: understanding, trust, and respect for skill and composure. As she stepped into the terminal, blending into the crowd, Emma reflected on the journey, the flight, had been ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in execution. Recognition had been given without spectacle, danger had been neutralized without panic, and life had continued uninterrupted for all but a select few who understood the magnitude of what had occurred. She allowed herself a quiet smile, a moment of private triumph, tempered by humility and gratitude.